drumstick? Yeah, hurry! Kickoff's in 2 minutes. The first tailgate Thanksgiving. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to Park Ridge Sports History. This week I'd like to share with you some memories I had of Thanksgiving Day and all things NFL football on one of America's greatest holidays that we share across the board, from New Jersey all the way to California and past that, Alaska and Hawaii as well. This week, I would love to share just some memories I had of Thanksgiving and some memorable moments from Thanksgiving Day football games, particularly, of course, of the Detroit Lions and the Dallas Cowboys, the two perennial teams that football has really given first claim to playing on Thanksgiving Day. And I'd like to talk about that as well, because it wasn't always the Cowboys and the Detroit Lions hosting the games. Other teams have as well. So part of the sports history here is to give you a little trivia and inform you about all that. Now, if I digress, it's because, as I say in every episode, so I just want you to treat this as if we're gone to a bar after a winning softball game and we're sharing a beer and a hamburger and talking all things and nothing but sports, and one thing leads into another. The Thanksgiving Day in my house as a kid would always start with a nice breakfast. And then my dad was a high school principal. So inevitably, he would always go to see the game. And what was kind of cool about Thanksgiving Day, especially in New Jersey, was that the games were about 10:30. And every other year, we'd be on the road traveling to one of the other towns, or my dad basically worked next door in the town that was adjacent to ours. And the high school would host the game. So we'd go over, and I remember just being a kid, third, fourth grade, going with him. And one of the great things my dad always did was not only would he congratulate, obviously, his high school's coach and AD for putting on and just doing a great job, but he would also make sure that he would meet the athletic director and the head coach from the opposing team. And I got to meet them all because I would just basically hang on to his coattails and travel. And of course, he would introduce me. I got to shake the coach's hands, and I thought that was always so cool. And then, of course, we would meet some of the players after the game. And I just looked up to them being so young and said, wow, these guys are future pros. I can't wait to have their football card and get them maybe potentially signed, since my dad has the in on this, right? But as you get older, you start to realize they're just high school kids. And now, as I'm much, much older, approaching 60, that they were just regular kids, juniors, seniors, some of them sophomores, I guess, who just played for the sheer fun of it, for the sheer pride of school and town, and they enjoyed it. But they did. I will tell you that I think they did get a kick out of me shaking their hands and probably being very starry-eyed. And obviously, the look that you would give them would be one of adulation. So they probably got their moment of glory that way from meeting me, one of a handful of kids that looked up to the high school player. But we would get home just in time. Now I can vividly recall this. We would see parts of Macy's Day Parade and then go to the game, obviously, and then come home. And I wouldn't always see kickoff of the first game, which was usually Detroit. As far as I remember, Detroit always kicked it off 12:35, 12:30. And I know I wouldn't see the entire game because our meal would start about 1:30, maybe even 1 o'clock. Thanksgiving, though, started the whole litany of football games, because when you think about it, I would start with the high school game, then go to 2 football games on Thursday, the pro games. Every once in a while, they brought back a third game. I didn't realize this, but in the early 60s, the AFL was also playing on Thanksgiving. And then on Friday, you'd go right back to college. It was college football. It was craze Friday with all kinds of college football. And then, of course, Saturday. Usually the Saturday game was, if Notre Dame was playing out on the West Coast, it was always Notre Dame at USC or Notre Dame against Stanford. But I recall more of Thanksgiving weekend always seeming to be Notre Dame at USC. Not that it helped any, but there were many times that Notre Dame would be staked to an early lead, only to watch SC just come back and roll them. Who can forget the 1974 Thanksgiving Day weekend when Notre Dame goes off to a 24-0 lead and Anthony Davis runs back a kick right before halftime. And then SC comes back and scores an additional 47 or 48 points, and they stomp on Notre Dame, beating them 55-24 in that game. And actually, that game, losing that game, really took Notre Dame out of any talk about who would finish number one in the year of 74. And in fact, Notre Dame goes on to stun in the Orange Bowl Alabama that year in the January 1st, 1975 Orange Bowl. They stunned them, beat them 13-10 or 13-11, and prevent Alabama from winning the national title. And of course, it was Ara's Parsegian's last game in the Notre Dame blue and gold uniform. But just getting back, and there I go, I digress. And we will talk about Notre Dame, Michigan State later on. I think I'll save that for maybe a broadcast in December or maybe even next week, because that's a classic. And I always felt that Ara was unfairly criticized for some of the decisions he made. And we'll talk about that in a future episode. I've promised that a couple of times already. The game I do remember, though, with Alex Karras, there's two. One is I never saw it, too young, but I did read about it. And here, I think I kind of stole my own song here, but here's Alex Karras. You know how I love the football cards. This one, I think, I'm going to say the other one. Let me just put that up there. I think this is like 1972. I know it's not a 1970. I do love that Columbia blue and silver uniform that the Lions have. They have one of the best profiled Lions going. I love the helmet. One thing, here's a pet peeve of mine. I can't stand the retro helmets that the NFL brings in or employs. There's no decal. There's no logo on it. I just don't find that appealing. Some teams, yes, but the Browns have been playing with, just the orange and the striping. But when I see they look like pawns on a chess, I love that logo. You've seen me do some shows on it. I love that logo of the Lions, and I wish they hadn't tried to make it more fierce or stylized that they have today. I like the one from the 1970s. It was very simple, but it was definitely a profile of a lion. It is in an unusual position of kind of rearing up on its hind legs and attacking, so it looked pretty good. And of course, the Lions had that beautiful, like I said, the Columbia blue, they call it, with the silver. And Karras in 1962, and this I was reading from a number of, can't recall which author it was, but it was The Life and Times of Vince Lombardi. And talks about his first years with the Packers, and 60, 61, and 62. We mentioned that with Paul Horning last week. In 62, I believe it was 62, they play the Green Bay Packers. Yes, Green Bay Packers play the Detroit Lions, and they're both vying for the playoffs in the Western Division or for first place, and Detroit thumps them. But what the author was talking about, and I never thought this was, I never saw Karras really being like this. But he starts to call Vince Lombardi all kinds of like names, inappropriate names that we wouldn't use today. He just called him all kinds of names, and he was just so happy for the Lions to defeat the Packers. But Lombardi doesn't say a word. I guess he tells the guys in the locker room that we'll get our revenge. And sure enough, they do, because the Packers go on. I think they meet them again later on in December, thump the Lions, and then win the NFL championship that year, beating the New York Giants rather handily in the NFL championship game. But why that kind of jumps out at me, because Karras was a character in my mind. He's not, I don't believe, and please don't write letters saying I got it wrong. I just didn't have time. But I do believe that Karras is not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I know he's in the college because he was a big All-American at the University of Iowa. He was from Indiana, goes out to Iowa, and doesn't really get along with his head coach, but still stays. And Iowa has some great years with Karras anchoring the defense. And in fact, I think they do go to the Rose Bowl. He goes to the Lions. Of course, as I said in our last episode, he, along with Paul Hornung from the rival Green Bay Packers, are both suspended in 1963 by Pete Rozelle for gambling. How ironic is that, since the NFL today has really incorporated the sports betting companies into sponsorship of their games and of their league. Anyway, back in 63, the players were not allowed to bet on the games. And of course, it was determined that both those great players did. Karras was an all-pro. And of course, Hornung, it disappointed Lombardi, as I said. But Karras, as I said, now he comes back. And the reason why I couldn't believe his actions in the 62, and it wasn't a big deal, I guess, but the author makes it a big deal. And I guess Lombardi uses it as, locker room fodder, but posted in the locker room bulletin boards, etc. But Karras was a character, and he was, everyone probably who doesn't remember him as a football player does remember him in his role as in Blazing Saddles, and a funny character that he played. And then he goes on to play with his real wife, Susan Clark, in Webster. They adopt a boy. And all right, maybe he wasn't laugh out loud funny, but as he was in Blazing Saddles, but he did have a pretty good sense of humor. And even Karras, and this was the other thing I was thinking about with Karras, is that in 1970, really the last year that Karras had any chance of making the playoffs and a run, because you got to remember, he played with some very good players. They had some very good parts on those Detroit Lions teams, but it seemed like they were always being bested. It was the time of Lombardi, so there was no way that the Lions were going to supersede the great Packer teams, that dynasty team of the 60s. You got to recall that the last time the Lions win a championship was about 1957. I've never, in my 60 years, have seen them win anything. They've gotten to a couple of playoff rounds. The reason why I say 1970, I remember that one vividly, because they lose to the Cowboys in the first round 5-0. And for the longest time in that game, in that playoff game played in Dallas, because both teams finished 10-4, but the Cowboys win their division and host. The Lions finished as the wild card behind the Vikings. That game was like 2-0 for the longest time until Mike Clark hit a field goal to put them up 5-0, but still not out of danger. And it came down to the very last seconds in that game. If not for that playoff game, Karras, I don't think, gets into any playoff games whatsoever, unless you include, I think they played in that losers playoff game, where if you finished second in your division, you would play the winner of the second, the runner-up in the other division in a bowl game in Florida. But nobody wanted to play that. For what? What was that? So that you have the right to say you were third best in the league. So it was one of those gadget gizmo games that the NFL came up with, entirely, more than likely, for the bettors to put a wager on. Anyway, Karras is probably out of the game, 72, 73. He does make All-Pro a number of times, but never played on any great team. But he did play with a great teammate by the name of Lem Barney. And I do have his picture as well, his football card. This may be late 60s, like 67, 68. Lem Barney was a great cornerback. I know everyone talks about Deion Sanders and Richard Sherman and all the rest of it, but and this was back in the day. Lem Barney not only was a cornerback, but he was a punt and a kickoff return specialist. And there are a number of you can go to a number of sites, just put in the Detroit Lions during the Lem Barney years. And I think for about 4 or 5 years there, he had at least one return, either for punt or kickoff, for a touchdown. Plus, he had a number of interception returns for touchdown. This guy was a lockdown cornerback before there were lockdown cornerbacks in the NFL. Plus, he was a true gentleman of the sport. Hall of Famer, obviously he's a Hall of Famer. Just a great player. Carried himself so well. But imagine him and Karras in the same defense. It's not too bad. And then there was a guy, I think, by the name of Joe Schmidt. I think in another thing I called him Mike Schmidt, Hall of Famer. But there was Joe Schmidt, who I think might have been the linebacker during those early or late 60s teams and maybe the early 70 teams with the Lions. They just never, one of the problems with the Lions, they never got a quarterback that could get them over the top. They had Bill Munson, they had Greg Landry, players like that, had some moments in games, but just didn't have the caliber or the talent to get them over the top. And they had a number of running backs who were pretty good, but not great. You had Mel Farr. I'm not talking about Barry Sanders. That's a whole different animal. Those are the 80s teams and early 90s for the Lions. And that team still, those Sanders teams, never had a quarterback that could complement Sanders and get the Lions over the top. I know the Lions went to I think they went to a championship one year and lost to the Redskins like 45-0. But those were the Joe Gibbs Redskins that would go on to win 3 Super Bowls. So again, it was like the Lions were good, but never good enough. But getting back to Thanksgiving, some of the games I remember that kind of stand out are the early 70 games, because I'll tell you this, it seemed like November hit in Detroit, and it looked like the landscapers or the groundskeepers always for that Thanksgiving Day game would wheel in piles and piles of snow. There were snow mounds in the background at Tiger Stadium for these games. And there was no such thing as grass back in the 70s and the late 60s. By about, I guess, the second week in October, all the grass that was beautifully sodded in September for these NFL games turned into dirt. And then by this time in Detroit, it would just turn into mud. Detroit and Cleveland had very similar playing surfaces. They were all mud. I'll even throw Green Bay in there too. Minnesota was a little different. It just seemed they were always playing on a sheet of ice. So they didn't get money because the field was ice. Anyway, Detroit always seemed to play in these muddy games. If you take a look at that 62 game against the Packers that they beat the Packers 26-4, the game I think was played in rain, or at least a steady drizzle, and the field was just mud. But one game that does stick out for me is a game against the Raiders. And the reason it sticks out to me is that the Raiders, I believe, in 1970 finished 8-4-2. It's not a vintage Raider team, but there are about 26 to 27 other NFL teams that would have taken that year without even looking if for themselves. I'm talking about the Patriots in the 70s or the Chargers or the Chicago Bears. 8-4-2, they take that in a heartbeat. But anyway, they had some quarterback problems. I know that LaMonica was their quarterback. I think he was on and off again, and he was also hurt a number of times in 70. John Madden brings in the Thanksgiving Day game. I'll never forget this. Kirk Gowdy is a sportscaster at the time of that game. It was played on Channel 4, NBC. And Blanda had been working some miracle comebacks for the Raiders in 1970. Now, you got to remember, he's about 43 years old. I think he lasts another 4 or 5 years. I think he retired from the game about age 48. He started his career in the old AAFC, I think, or in the old NFL. I think he does play in the All-American Football Conference. That's the one that had the Baltimore Colts and the 49ers and the Cleveland Browns. Maybe he doesn't. Regardless, his career starts at 48, plays with the Bears. I do remember that he goes to the Oilers. I didn't see him play on the Oilers. I remember him specifically with the Raiders. And, of course, he is a pretty good field goal kicker. Probably people would he's the kind of guy that would find his way. He did. Age 43, he's still hanging on and being very productive. But he's not the field goal kickers that we see today that are just lights out and, are hitting everything all over the field. As I mentioned last week, field goal kickers were, okay, anybody kick here? Okay, throw you in there. It didn't have the science or the evolution that does in the game today. It's interesting because the game is called football, and many of the elements of football are missing in the game of football. And so Blanda, I remember coming into that game. He's exciting. He does lead the Raiders on a couple of, I think, touchdown runs, but it wasn't enough. The Lions actually win the game 28-14. That one kind of sticks out only because the Raiders are playing. And the funny thing is, the Raiders the Lions are usually playing. And the only reason I say usually playing, but just based on records, for the most part, they're either playing the Bears or the Packers on Thanksgiving Day. But in the early 70s, when the AFL joined the NFL, the Lions in 4 or 5 years played AFC teams. So the Raiders, they bested 28-14 in November 26, 1970. The following year, they would play the Chiefs and beat them 32-21. Then they played the Jets and defeated them 37-20. And as a kid, you got to remember, I'm thinking, wow, the Lions are pretty good as a team. They can't be beaten. Actually, though, the Lions are just really mediocre, to say the least, on Thanksgiving. I think they may even be one game below 500 right now. And they've played in quite a few, the most of any team. We'll get to that in a second, too. But then they finish up this run. They play the Denver Broncos. This is a game I kind of remember. It was 1974. They played the Broncos. And Otis Armstrong, who went to Purdue, was one of their big running backs for the Broncos. Floyd Little is kind of winding down his career. I know he got hurt a couple of times early in his career. Floyd Little was a great All-American player at Syracuse, number 44, and then he has a really good playing career playing for the Orange Crush in Mile High, Denver. And but I do remember Otis Armstrong having a pretty good game against the Lions and beating him 31-24. And then in 1976, Buffalo. Now, here's something that's interesting, and I didn't know this until I was going over this. Buffalo makes back-to-back Thanksgiving Day appearances. In 1976, OJ rushes like crazy against them and runs for 273 yards or something. He set an NFL record that day. And remember, the Bills are pretty good in 75. I think they win the division and lose to the Steelers in the playoffs. But OJ has a great Thanksgiving Day game against the Lions. But somehow the Bills only score 14 points and lose 27-14. Why? They had a backup quarterback who couldn't do anything that day. And it kind of hurt them. But if he's running for 275 yards, it's one of those things. He probably ran for, they're at their own one. This is what usually happens. Runs for, they start at their own one. He runs for 97 yards, and then they get stopped as they decide to maybe throw a little flat pass, and it's intercepted or incomplete or whatever. So it was that type of day for the Bills. OJ has a great game, and quarterback doesn't do anything for them. And, of course, the Lions best them. And, of course, the Lions in 75, I actually think they finished under 500. But here's the deal. Or that was 1976, pardon me. In 1975, the Bills also played, but they played the St. Louis Cardinals in Rich Stadium in Buffalo and destroyed the Cardinals 32-14. I still haven't found out why Detroit didn't play that day, why they weren't on the Thanksgiving Day ledger. I've gone to all different websites, and as I'm saying this, I did make inquiries and all the rest of it. I guess it was just that the league said, you know what, we just want to maybe preview a different venue and maybe go with a different club. And maybe it had something to do with the Players Association, maybe not wanting to play, or, the owner saying, hey, you know what, Thanksgiving Day, Detroit basically has a monopoly on the game, and they have a chance to really market their club. Let's give it to some other players. And, of course, you do have in 75, 76, O.J. Simpson in his pinnacle of his NFL playing days. So all that probably came into play, and they said, you know what, we're just going to go with Bills and the Cardinals for that game. Actually, pardon me, it wasn't the Bill. I'm overlooking this. It wasn't the Bills and the Cardinals. It wasn't Detroit does play. Pardon me. Detroit does play. They play the Rams and lose to the Rams 20-0. So there I go, making a mistake. It was the Cowboys who didn't play. All the reasons I just gave you is probably why the league said no to the Cowboys, because the Cowboys were the America's team. How funny is this? I'm telling you, this is what I'm saying. We're talking in a bar, and I'm going off one track, and I'm looking, and I'm just not thinking here. The Bills in 75 played Cardinals. The Rams defeat the Lions 20-0. My whole essay there about who didn't play was intended about the Cowboys, and everything I just said, marketing, the fact that the Dallas Cowboys probably had a monopoly on the game, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all the reasons probably why the league said, you know what, we'll have a different venue. We'll showcase two different teams, and we'll give the Cowboys the day off. So, pardon me, I take it back about the Lions not playing on Thanksgiving Day, and I just want to say all those things I just remarked about pertain to the Cowboys not playing. Actually, it's a pretty good segue into the Cowboys, because the two games that most resonate with me with the Cowboys, actually three games, was 1969. It was actually probably the first Cowboy game I ever watched with my brother Jim. And at that point, my brother was like, the Cowboys, they always win on Thanksgiving Day. I think they were unbeaten at the time on Thanksgiving Day, because what happened was this. Tex Schramm had said, we want to promote our team. He saw Thanksgiving as a way to promote his team. And probably one of the more brilliant marketers of the NFL was Tex Schramm. And he knew that he had basically a monopoly on the audience on Thanksgiving. So he was insistent on playing on Thanksgiving Day. So the NFL back in the 60s opened up the game not just to the Detroit Lions, but also to the Dallas Cowboys. And for the most part, the Cowboys have been playing on Thanksgiving Day almost every year except 1975. And I do apologize. I don't want anybody saying that you don't know what you're talking about. I just made a simple gaffe. But the Cowboys were always playing on Thanksgiving Day as a kid. I remember sitting in a rocking chair watching the game with my brother on a black and white set, and the TV moved around. And my brother Jim was a Cowboy fan. I know he loved Don Meredith, and fell in love always with Roger Staubach. I think that's one of the reasons why we're Cowboy fans. And I always liked Bob Lilly. And my favorite player on those Cowboys teams was a guy by the name of Jethro Pugh. And just digressing here, I know that Pugh in that ice ball game against the Packers had like 3 or 4 frostbite digits that the fingers on his hands were frostbit after that game. Didn't lose him, thank God. But he really suffered quite an abuse in that game to his body. I mean, frostbite. Anyway, those are like 4 favorite players I had with the Cowboys. But that particular game, the 49ers were playing the Cowboys. And the game, well, the Cowboys didn't lose. My brother was right about that. But they actually ended the game in a tie. 49ers tied the Cowboys 24-24. Cowboys were a playoff team, obviously, in 69. They would lose to the Browns in the first round of the playoffs, or what they would call probably the first round. The 49ers were just really revving up, because the funny thing is, in 70 and 71, they would face the Cowboys in the championship games. And the Cowboys in those years would go on to the Super Bowl, lose, of course, the Colts in 70, and then defeat rather handily the Dolphins in 71. So that they would be their rivals there. And then, interestingly enough, later on in the 90s, Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Deion Sanders playing for both teams, etc. Some classic games between the Niners and the Cowboys, specifically in the NFL championships or NFC championship games. Anyway, that game stands out for me because it was black and white. I knew what the Cowboys logo looked like with the star. Never saw the 49ers before, so that was like the first game. Now I'm watching this game in black and white with my brother. But if anybody remembers, the Cowboys used to play in the Cotton Bowl. And late in the game, especially if it was a sunny day, or even the lights would provide the artificial lights. But they were like, I would say, speakers. And the speakers were so high that their shadow would be cast along the 40 and the 50 and the yard line. And I was always, I don't know why it stands out for me, because I also saw them in the Cotton Bowl. Notre Dame played in back-to-back Cotton Bowls in 70 and 71. Or 71, 70 and 71. And these towers, and I think they were speaker towers, would have cast their shadow almost all the way to the 50-yard line, but you could see them brilliantly. And it was just one of those things. To this day, if you show me pictures of stadiums, I can probably pick out quite a few just by their own idiosyncrasies. You know, mounds of snow, you can tell Detroit and Cleveland when the Browns were playing by the Mistake by the Lake Municipal Stadium. And for me, the Cotton Bowl, it stood out, these loud, the shadows of these loudspeakers that were very prevalent at the Cotton Bowl. But that game stands out. And of course, 1970, and I guess this is a bit of revenge. This game really stands out for me because it was payback time for the Cowboys. And of course, the Packers were, they are in their fast descent from championship team of the 60s, the Yankee or the dynasty team of the 60s. Now they're plummeting. But the Cowboys beat the the Packers 16-3 in a Thanksgiving Day game that was not as close as the score indicated. I know that Ray Nitschke was the middle linebacker for the Packers, and of course, he was in his, he was past his prime, obviously. I just remember that the Packers, it was a closer game than it really was. The Cowboys just, they weren't clicking with Craig Morton at the quarterback helm. He was their quarterback in 70, and he was just not clicking. If you recall, if you're a real Cowboy fan, you'll know that in 1970, the Cowboys are at 5-4, and their fourth loss is an embarrassing 38-0 shutout to the St. Louis Cardinals in the Cotton Bowl. And everybody thought, ooh, what's wrong? Well, the Cowboys then go on to win 5 straight regular season games, finish the season 10-4, beat the Lions, beat the 49ers, and then lose in the Super Bowl. But at that point, their offense wasn't clicking. And in this Thanksgiving Day game, I think this makes them probably 7-4. They still weren't clicking. And basically the Cowboys kept the Packers around. Nevertheless, it was an enjoyable game because I felt good for my brother because he kind of got a little bit of revenge after the Packers beat the Cowboys not once but twice in the championship games in the 60s, including that famous ice ball game. And then the last one, this one, it's funny. I do remember this one. I do have it. Roger Staubach was their quarterback for so many years. And he was like Mr. Comeback. They were called America's team for a number of reasons. And one of them was Staubach, Navy guy, Heisman Trophy, All-American, good guy, charisma. And, of course, he's playing on the team that is really getting quite a bit of publicity, TV exposure, a la the Thanksgiving Day games and all the rest of it. But in a game against Washington, late in the game, Staubach gets hurt, and they got to bring in this guy, Clint Longley, who is the antithesis of Staubach. You can even tell, Staubach had still that close cropped hair from his Navy days. Longley is the long hair, kind of crazy kind of guy, and he chucks 2 bombs, and the Cowboys come out of nowhere to keep up their tradition of being America's team and defeat the Redskins in a game that the Redskins thought that they had, especially after they knock Staubach out of the box. Longley comes in. I'll show him to you again. Clint Longley, the Mad Bomber, comes in and fashions 2 comeback touchdown drives to defeat the Redskins. And, of course, they're their big arch rival. And, of course, I could talk real quick about the Leon Lett game in which he fumbled a ball that shouldn't have been. I always feel sorry for Lett because not too many people really know the nuances or all of the rules in football. Most of the players probably don't know the rules because they're playing and they know how to play well. But in that particular game, I think it was 93, it was played in snow and ice. He touched the punt. It's a fumble. It is picked up by Miami. And, of course, they go on to stun the Cowboys in the 93. And what makes that memorable is that Leon Lett does the same thing in a future Super Bowl where he holds out the ball, and instead of scoring a touchdown, it's knocked away by the Buffalo Bills. Even though they go in for a score, 2 embarrassing moments for Leon Lett, who was an excellent ball player. This is Will O'Toole sharing his Thanksgiving Day, Football Day memories on Park Ridge Sports History. Again, I want to thank you all for allowing me into your homes. And with that, I'd like to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and leave with this one cartoon. I told my kid, even if he did dress like me, he still wasn't coming to the tailgate party. Stay safe. See you next week. Thanks again.